My son forgot to hang up the phone. I heard him say four words that changed everything. He has to go. I didn't say a word back. 2 months later, he and his wife came home from a business trip smiling, right up until their key wouldn't turn in the lock. On the doorstep, they found a note. When they read it, they started screaming. My name is Frank Sullivan. I'm 74 years old. For 41 years, I ran a small auto shop outside Denver, Colorado, fixing transmissions and brakes for anybody who walked through my door. I raised one son in the house on Willow Creek Lane, buried my wife from that house, and thought I would die peacefully in that house too. My son had other plans. This is the story of how I found out about them and what I did before he ever got the chance. My wife Margaret passed away 2 years ago on a cold February morning, right there in the bedroom we'd shared for 39 years. After the funeral, the house on Willow Creek Lane felt too big and too quiet for one old man. I still made coffee for two out of habit some mornings before I caught myself. My son Kevin called me every Sunday like clockwork, and about 6 months after Margaret died, he showed up at my door with his wife Denise, and a suggestion that sounded, at the time, like the kindest thing anyone had offered me in years. "Dad, you shouldn't be rattling around this big house by yourself," he said, standing in my kitchen with his hands in his pockets. "Denise and I were talking. Why don't we move in with you? Help you out, keep you company, save on rent while we save up for our own place." I remember how relieved I felt. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. Within 3 weeks, they'd packed up their apartment in Lakewood and moved into the two spare bedrooms upstairs, the ones Margaret and I had once hoped to fill with grandchildren. For the first few months, it really did feel like a blessing. Denise cooked dinner most nights. Kevin fixed the gutters and mowed the lawn without me asking. We watched football together on Sundays the way we used to when he was a boy, and for the first time since Margaret died, the house didn't feel so empty. I told my neighbor Harold across the street that I was the luckiest old man in Colorado, having my own son look after me like that. I had no idea, none at all, that the man smiling across my dinner table every night was already counting down the days until the house belonged to somebody else, and that somebody wasn't going to be me. By the 6th month, small things started changing, the kind of things you brush off because you don't want to believe what they might mean. Denise started calling the house ours instead of your dad's place when she talked to her sister on the phone in the kitchen. She replaced the curtains Margaret had picked out without asking me, said the old ones were letting in too much dust. Kevin started bringing up money more, asking about my pension, my savings account, whether the house was fully paid off, which it was, free and clear since 2009. I didn't think much of it. A son should know these things, I told myself. One night at dinner, Kevin mentioned that his old college friend Mark had just inherited his mother's house in Aurora and sold it for close to $900,000. "Prices out here are just crazy right now," he said, looking around my kitchen in a way that made the back of my neck feel cold, though I couldn't have told you why at the time. Denise started inviting a realtor friend of hers over for coffee, a woman named Patricia, who I later learned had actually given them an estimate on my house without my knowledge, back when I thought she was just a friend stopping by to be neighborly. Looking back now, I can see all of it clearly, laid out like a map. Back then, I just saw a son and daughter-in-law settling into a routine, and an old man grateful not to be alone. I want you to remember that feeling, that trust, because it's the same trust that made what came next hit so hard when I finally understood what was really happening under my own roof. About 8 months in, Kevin started saying things like, "Dad, you're forgetting things more than you used to," even when I hadn't forgotten anything at all. I misplaced my reading glasses one Tuesday, the same way I had my whole life, and by dinner Kevin was telling Denise across the table, like I wasn't sitting right there, that he was getting worried about Dad's memory. I laughed it off at first. "Everybody misplaces their glasses," I told him. He didn't laugh back. He started driving me to my regular doctor's appointments, even though I'd been driving myself for 50 years without a single accident, and he'd sit in the room asking Dr. Patel pointed questions about cognitive decline and early warning signs, questions I hadn't asked and didn't need answered. Denise started leaving pamphlets on the kitchen counter, the kind with soft lighting and smiling gray-haired actors on the cover, pamphlets for assisted living communities with names like Golden Meadows and Peaceful Pines. When I asked her about them, she said, sweet as anything, "Oh, those are just for research, Frank, in case we ever need them down the road." Down the road. That's the phrase she used. I didn't argue. I didn't want to be the paranoid old man accusing his own family of something ugly over a stack of glossy brochures. So I kept quiet, kept smiling, kept thanking them for looking out for me, while some part of me, the part that had survived 41 years of running a business and reading people who lied to my face about their car troubles, started paying much closer attention to every single word coming out of my son's mouth. It happened on a Thursday afternoon in April. I'd gone out to the garage to look for a socket wrench I hadn't used in years, just puttering around the way old men do, when I heard Kevin's voice coming from the kitchen through the door I'd left cracked open. He was on the phone, and from the way he was talking, low and fast, I could tell he thought he was alone in the house. "No, listen," he was saying. "The doctor already said his memory is declining. That's on record now. That's what we need. Once we get him into Golden Meadows, the paperwork practically signs itself. We're not talking about kicking him out. We're talking about him needing care he can't get living alone with us working full-time." I stood frozen in that garage doorway with a socket wrench in my hand, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he'd hear it through the wall. He kept going. "Patricia already ran the numbers. With the market the way it is right now, we're looking at right around $890,000 for the house, maybe more if we list before fall. That covers his care for years and leaves plenty left over for us." Denise must have said something back because Kevin laughed, actually laughed, and said, "He has to go. That's just the reality of it, Denise. It's not personal. It's just what makes sense for everybody. He has to go." 4 words. I stood in that garage for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 2 minutes, and I did not make a single sound. I set the socket wrench down as quietly as I'd picked it up, walked back through the yard, and sat down on the porch steps in the April sun, like nothing in the entire world had just changed, even though everything had. I want to be honest with you about something. My first instinct standing in that garage was to walk into that kitchen and ask my son exactly what kind of man says he has to go about his own father, like I was an old couch nobody wanted anymore. But I didn't. 41 years of running a business teaches you something valuable, and it isn't how to fix a transmission. It's how to keep your face calm when somebody's lying to you, so you can figure out exactly what they're planning before you say a single word. So that night at dinner, I ate Denise's pot roast and asked Kevin how work was going, same as always. I didn't mention the phone call. I didn't mention Golden Meadows, or the $890,000, or the fact that my own son had just described getting rid of me the same way you'd describe getting rid of a car that failed inspection. I went to bed that night and I did not sleep, not 1 minute. I lay there in the dark, going over every polite little comment Denise had made about those brochures, every doctor's appointment Kevin had suddenly started attending, every question about my pension and my savings, and whether the house was paid off free and clear. It all lined up now, every piece of it, like a puzzle I'd been too trusting to see the shape of. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, lying there in the house I'd owned since 1991, the house where I'd raised that same son who now wanted me gone, I made a decision. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to accuse anybody of anything. I was simply going to find out exactly where I stood, legally, before they had the chance to make a single move against me. The following Monday, I told Kevin I had a doctor's appointment across town, and drove myself there in my own truck, the same 2011 Ford F-150 I'd had for 13 years. Instead of the doctor's office, I drove to see a lawyer named Grace Whitman, whose office was above a bakery on Colfax Avenue, recommended to me years ago by a customer from the shop. I sat across from her desk and told her everything: the phone call, the brochures, the questions about my finances, all of it laid out plain. Grace listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, and when I finished, she pulled up the county records right there on her computer. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, "I want you to understand something clearly. This house is deeded solely in your name, just yours. No one else is on that title, and unless you've signed a power of attorney or some other legal document, nobody can sell this house, admit you to a facility, or touch a single dollar of your money without your consent." Then she asked me a question that made my stomach drop. "Has your son asked you to sign anything recently? Any paperwork he described as insurance forms or medical authorizations or anything like that?" And I remembered it instantly, a stack of papers Kevin had left on the kitchen table 2 weeks earlier, telling me they were just updated insurance documents for the house that needed my signature for the records. I hadn't signed them yet, kept meaning to get to it, kept putting it off because I don't sign anything without my reading glasses and a clear head. Grace asked me to bring those papers in immediately, and when I did, 3 days later, she confirmed exactly what we both already suspected. They weren't insurance forms at all. They were a durable power of attorney, giving Kevin full legal control over my finances, my health care, and my home. I never signed that power of attorney, and I never will. But finding it changed something in me. I wasn't just an old man being talked about behind his back anymore. I was a man whose own son had tried to trick him into signing away control of his own life on a Tuesday afternoon over a stack of papers labeled to look boring and routine. Grace Whitman helped me understand my options, and she recommended a realtor she trusted completely, a sharp young woman named Carla Nguyen, no relation to anybody Denise knew, who worked out of an office in Cherry Creek and had a reputation for moving houses fast and quiet when clients needed discretion. I met Carla at a coffee shop 2 miles from the house, paid cash for both our coffees, and told her I wanted to sell my house without my son or his wife knowing anything about it until it was already done. Carla didn't ask why. She just nodded like she'd heard this kind of story before, more than once, and told me the market in my neighborhood was hot enough that a house like mine, 4 bedrooms, updated kitchen, sitting on a third of an acre on Willow Creek Lane, could realistically bring in close to $900,000 if we moved quickly. I opened a new bank account at a credit union across town that Kevin didn't know existed, had my mail redirected to a P.O. box, and started meeting Carla every Thursday afternoon while Kevin and Denise thought I was at physical therapy for my knee. For the first time in months, I felt like I was the one holding the cards again, and it felt better than I can properly explain to you. To keep Kevin and Denise relaxed and unsuspecting, I did something that still makes me smile a little now. I let them take me on a tour of Golden Meadows. I walked through those hallways with the soft lighting and the smell of lemon cleaner, nodded politely at the activities calendar pinned to a corkboard, and even told the tour coordinator the dining room looked lovely, all while knowing I had absolutely no intention of ever living there. Kevin looked so pleased in the car afterward, telling Denise on speakerphone that Dad seemed really open to it, that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Meanwhile, Carla Nguyen had listed my house under a private, discreet listing that never showed up on the big websites Kevin or Denise might casually stumble across, marketed only to a small network of serious buyers through word of mouth. Within 9 days, we had 3 offers. The best one came from a young couple named Mark and Priya Anderson, expecting their first baby, who fell in love with the backyard where Kevin used to play catch with me 40 years earlier. Their offer came in at $890,000, all cash, with a flexible closing date and no contingencies, exactly the kind of clean, fast deal Grace Whitman had told me to watch for. I sat in Carla's office and signed that purchase agreement with a hand that was steadier than I expected, thinking about my son's voice in that garage doorway saying, "He has to go," like it was the easiest decision in the world. Well, Kevin, I remember thinking as I signed my name, somebody does have to go. Turns out it just isn't going to be me. About 2 weeks after I signed that agreement, Kevin came home from work practically glowing, the way he used to when he was a kid and got picked for the baseball team. His company was sending him and Denise to a conference in Chicago for 8 days, all expenses paid, and Denise was already talking about the hotel spa and a nice dinner they'd booked at some steakhouse downtown. "It's actually perfect timing, Dad," Kevin told me over dinner, not realizing exactly how right he was. "While we're gone, you should think more about Golden Meadows. Maybe even put down a deposit before we get back, get the ball rolling." I told him I'd think about it, same calm voice I'd been using for weeks now, and inside I was doing the math. Carla and Grace had already told me closing could happen in as little as 12 days once both sides signed off on the final paperwork, and the Andersons, eager and pre-approved, were ready to move the moment I gave the word. Kevin and Denise left for the airport on a Sunday morning, suitcases by the door, Denise reminding me 3 separate times to water her orchids while they were gone. I stood on the porch and waved as Kevin's car pulled out of the driveway, the same driveway he used to ride his bike down as a boy, and the second that car turned the corner onto Maple Street and disappeared, I called Carla Nguyen and told her one simple thing. "Let's move the closing date up. Let's do it this week, while they're gone, before they ever get the chance to come home and try to stop what's already been set in motion." The closing happened on a Wednesday, 4 days into Kevin and Denise's trip, in a small conference room at the title company on Spear Boulevard. Mark and Priya Anderson sat across the table from me, Priya's hand resting on her round belly, both of them practically bouncing with excitement about raising their child in that backyard. I signed page after page, feeling lighter with every signature, and when it was finally done, Carla handed me a check for $890,000, minus fees and commission, more money than I had ever seen in one place in my entire life. I had already found my own new home, a bright, independent living condo at a community called Sunrise Ridge, 30 minutes away in Golden, Colorado, with mountain views out every window, and a woodworking shop in the basement I could use whenever I wanted. Nobody chose it for me off a glossy brochure. I chose it myself, walked through it myself, paid for it in cash myself, and signed my own name on my own lease. I spent that Wednesday afternoon and all of Thursday with two movers I'd hired quietly weeks in advance, packing up 40 years of my life, Margaret's china, my father's old workbench, photographs off the walls, everything that actually mattered, and left the rest behind for the new owners, who were thrilled to take the furniture off my hands for a fair price. By Thursday evening, the house on Willow Creek Lane belonged completely to Mark and Priya Anderson. The locks had been changed by a locksmith Carla arranged, and I was sitting in my new living room in Golden, Colorado, watching the sun go down behind the mountains with a cup of coffee in my hand, feeling more peace than I had felt in over a year, maybe longer than that. Before I left Willow Creek Lane for the very last time, I sat down at the kitchen table Margaret and I had eaten breakfast at for 39 years and wrote one final letter, not to be cruel, just to be honest. I taped it to the front door, where I knew Kevin's key would fail to turn, right at eye level, in an envelope with his name written on it in the same handwriting he used to bring home report cards for me to sign. I told him I knew everything. I told him I'd been standing in the garage that Thursday afternoon in April with a socket wrench in my hand, when I heard him tell Denise on the phone that I had to go, and that I heard him talk about the $890,000 like it was already spent. I told him the house had been sold, fair and legal, to a wonderful young family who deserved it far more than two people who'd spent a year planning how to put their own father away. I told him I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. Just disappointed in a way that went deeper than anger ever could. And that I hoped someday he understood what it actually feels like to be the person somebody else decides is inconvenient. I told him not to bother trying to reach me at the old numbers, since I'd already closed those accounts, but that I would answer if he ever called simply to say he was sorry, and meant it. I signed it the way I'd signed every card and letter to that boy since he was 7 years old. Love, Dad. Then I locked the door for the last time, got in my truck, and drove away from Willow Creek Lane without looking back even once in the mirror. Kevin told me later, though I didn't hear it from his own mouth until weeks after, that he and Denise pulled into the driveway on Willow Creek Lane that Sunday evening, still tan and relaxed from their trip, Denise already talking about unpacking and checking on her orchids. Kevin walked up to the front door with his key in hand, same as he'd done 10,000 times before, and it simply would not turn. He assumed it was jammed, jiggled it, tried again, called out to Denise that something was wrong with the lock. That's when Priya Anderson opened the door from the inside, confused, holding her newborn daughter against her shoulder, asking Kevin who exactly he was and why he was trying to get into her house. According to my neighbor Harold, who watched the whole thing unfold from his porch across the street, Kevin stood frozen on the steps for a long moment before he noticed the envelope taped just beside the doorframe with his name written across the front. Harold said Denise read it first, standing right there on the front lawn in the fading evening light, and that her hands started shaking about halfway through. He said Kevin grabbed the letter from her when she couldn't finish it, read the rest himself, and that's when the screaming started, right there on the lawn, loud enough that 3 different neighbors came out onto their porches to see what was happening. Harold told me Denise dropped to her knees on the grass. Kevin just stood there holding that letter, staring at a house that no longer had a single thing inside it that belonged to him, in front of a young family he'd never met, on a street he thought he'd own free and clear in a matter of months. My phone started ringing 4 minutes later. I didn't answer it. Not that night. Kevin called me 31 times over the next 3 days. I let every single one go to voicemail, not out of cruelty, but because I wanted him to sit with exactly the feeling he'd been so ready to hand me. On the 4th day, sitting on my new balcony in Golden with the mountains turning orange in the evening light, I finally picked up. His voice cracked the second I said hello. "Dad, please, we didn't mean it like that. We can fix this. Just tell us where you are." I let him talk for a while. Let him get through the apologies and the excuses about stress and money and how things had just gotten away from them, and when he finally stopped, I told him the truth as plainly as I could. I told him I'd heard every word of that phone call in April, that I knew about the power of attorney disguised as insurance forms, that I knew exactly what Golden Meadows and $890,000 had meant to him and Denise for months before I ever said a word about any of it. I told them I wasn't going to yell at him, because he was still my son and I still loved him, but that love didn't mean I owed him a house I'd worked 41 years to pay off, especially not after he'd decided on his own that I had to go. I told him I was happy, genuinely happy, in a place I'd chosen myself, surrounded by people my own age who respected me instead of planning around me. Before I hung up, I told him the door wasn't completely closed, not forever, but that it would only open again when he was ready to see me as his father again, and not as $890,000 standing in the way of his plans. I hung up the phone, set it on the table beside my coffee, and looked out at those mountains one more time, feeling, for the first time in longer than I could remember, completely and finally at peace. If you made it to the end of this one, you already know exactly what it feels like when a quiet man finally stops being quiet.